can't believe the world abandoned Afghanistan. Our friends are going to get killed. They're going to kill us. Our women are not going to have any more rights.
I stand squarely behind my decision. After 20 years, I've learned the hard way that there was never a good time to withdraw U.S. forces. That's why we're still there. We were clear-eyed about the risk. We planned for every contingency, but I always promised the American people that I would be straight with you. The truth is, this did unfold more quickly than we had anticipated.
I think India must be patient. This, simply, oh my God, the world has collapsed because Taliban has come to power. That I don't think that's the way any large state does business in the world.
So this week, the big news, the big international news is the Taliban's takeover of Kabul and taking over Kabul. First thing is, before we get into what you talk about in Delhi and Kabul in your piece, there's been some talk, especially out of American news outlets, I think CNN being one of them, that America had actually been hiding the extent to which the Taliban had been successful on the ground militarily, which is one of the incompetence of the Afghan defense forces. And do you see there's some merit in that argument? This kind of thing that's going around in the Western media right now?
No, this is really the American internal argument. See, this is now who's responsible, what happened, because last many years, quite clearly the army did not want to leave Afghanistan, in a defeat, with a defeat in its hands. So the army was justifying, the military leadership in the US was justifying a prolonged presence. They opposed both Trump and Biden initially to say, look, to go for full withdrawal. So I think now it is an internal tussle in a large democracy between different institutions. But it didn't have to be rocket scientists to figure out, look, Taliban was gaining ground. Last 2-3 years, and certainly in the last few months. So I think that there was no, for us, outside Washington, there was no question that the Taliban was gaining ground. It is a matter of what is surprising, I think, is the swiftness of the collapse. That this is something that probably no one had anticipated, that how quickly the system would just cave in. Probably, because the air cover was withdrawn, the logistical supply had dried out. So many commanders on the ground, of the government, I think simply either surrendered or switched sides. I think if they were not in a position to fight, this is what would happen. And we saw this also in the 90s, 96, when the Taliban took over. Most places there was very little fighting. A lot of it really simply defections that took place. So I think once the political will seemed to erode in Kabul, it was a matter of time that this was going to fall. But no one expected the speed at which the end game would unfold.
So one of the things in your piece today, which is on the indianexpress.com, as well as probably where you're watching this video, one of the things you talk about is how the gloom and doom in Delhi may be excessive. Taliban is in Kabul. It is a victory for Pakistan in a certain sense of the Pakistan security establishment, and you acknowledge that as well. The gloom and doom is excessive, and and they are making some of the right noises. But so far, how do you view their actions in terms of, there's no question now of any form of unity government or any kind of negotiation with the other forces, and as you point out in the piece, they may make the right noises about, oh yes, women's rights and human rights, but already reports seem to indicate the contrary. In this sense, I know it's a bit hyper moralizing, but do you think there is a sense of saying this is going to end up as a form of appeasement, because this has happened consistently with certain kinds of ideological forces, when you end up saying that, if there's that much wait and see, and you end up with an Afghanistan which goes back, say, 30 years, almost, within 6 months.
No, it's appeasing. I'm saying, that India is going to appease, or the world is going to appease. Look, I think it's not a question of appeasement. It's a question of, what has happened. If you're a policymaker, there's no point to mourning over what's happened. There's space for, analysis, postmortem, all that will take place. But you have to deal with new facts on the ground. merely bemoaning the collapse of the Kabul government is not enough. I mean, if you're a government, now what do you do next? Is the question. And there, I think there will be possibilities. And I think it's not, the world is full of sovereign actors who do different things, and we don't have control over what others do. So you have to find ways of responding to it. The burden of the argument in this piece is that, look, be patient, deal with things as they come along, because the contradictions of the Taliban's emergence and its support for Pakistan, Pakistan and Taliban have done remarkably well, you can say, last few weeks, but there will be issues. So I think one is we have to defend ourselves if there is renewed terrorism. But at the same time, we must also be open to the potential possibilities that are going to emerge as the contradictions in Afghanistan and around Afghanistan begin to unfold.
So one of the interesting things you say in your piece with regard to this, I mean, so say the India, Pakistan, Afghanistan axis, you talk about the Panikkar thesis and the Indus Rider and how things that happen along our northwestern neighbors inevitably will have an effect downriver. So there is one of the interesting things you mentioned is the contradictions that even Pakistan will be facing, that we are not in the 1990s anymore. How do you see that playing out, say, vis-a-vis China, the blood brothers or iron brother friendship, or the various terms they use? Because there is Xinjiang, there are problems. We're in a this entire region, and this kind of politics can have an effect on those relationships. What do you think India and the government should be looking out for in that regard, in terms of an opening?
No, yeah, as I said, look, nobody in the world today wants Afghanistan to return to the bad old days where it was the terror central, Al-Qaeda, Bin Laden, everybody was sitting there and doing what they wanted. So therefore, there is a consensus today, which is very different from the 90s. Because 90s, when India was facing terrorism, there was no empathy for India in any of the major powers. Most of them thought it as a Kashmir problem rather than as a terror problem. So I think, but today, I mean, much has changed in the last 30 years and from the 90s. So today, for China, for example, China and Pakistan are dear friends, are strong partners. But even all the statements that China has issued so far, they want ironclad commitments that the Taliban would not use, the soil of Afghanistan to promote, terrorist groups in Xinjiang. Russia has the same issues. The US, of course, has the issues. Iran has the same issues. We have the same issues, and so the situation is different, and that Pakistan doesn't have the kind of free hand because there's something called the FATF today, Financial Action Task Force, which didn't exist in the 90s vis-a-vis Pakistan. So there are constraints today on Pakistan that you switch. The assumption that you simply switch on the terror button and that we're back into the 90s. So there are international constraints, and I think that is quite real. Second is the Pakistan itself. I think we tend to underestimate. Pakistan itself can be a victim of a Taliban that is ready to support, for example, if Afghan Taliban supports the Pakistani Taliban, then you have a situation in Pakistan where already the TTP, or the Pakistan Taliban, is saying, look, they want a independent zone in the tribal areas, that they share the same ideology as the Afghan Taliban. So Pakistan too has problems. Of course, we can argue that Pakistan will take care of the Pakistani Taliban, but would love to direct Lashkar and other groups against India. Maybe they want to, but I think India has had experience with that. India has a better international support on those issues, and there are some constraints on Pakistan. So this is a different system, a different situation. This doesn't mean we won't have problems, but I think how we deal with this new situation will be somewhat different from the kind of situation we had obtained in the 1990s.
Just a final question, which is just a follow-up, just to expand on what you said. Do you think Pakistan, of course, it's a great moment, like you said, it is a sort of diplomatic as well as strategic victory for Pakistan at the moment, but it could be Pyrrhic because if you want, Pakistan has had this experience. Does any state, but particularly the Pakistan state, have the capacity to control these forces once they've been unleashed? And do you think General Bajwa seems to be someone who recognizes that? And do you think there's some kind which may make Pakistan more careful even vis-a-vis India?
Look, I think this idea that, I'm skeptical of the notion that, look, Pakistan can forever control the Taliban. I mean, that they gave them sanctuary for 20 years. So they protected them from the Americans. They made sure they probably gave support to the Taliban's military operations in the last few weeks. So Taliban has a lot to be grateful for Pakistan. But that doesn't mean in international politics does not operate on the basis of gratitude and friendship. That once Taliban takes charge of the state, they would be as much for their autonomy as any other actor in the international system. So I think there will be tensions in that policy. Whether, for example, in the 90s, Taliban did not recognize the Durand Line, which is supposed to be the border between Pakistan and Afghanistan, drawn by the British. But Taliban said, look, we don't recognize it, which is no Afghan government has recognized the Durand Line as a border. And there's no indication that they will. And in fact, we saw last few days, there was a conflict on the border where Pakistan has shut down the border. The Taliban local commanders saying, no, you must open it. After all, these are the same people on both sides. The second is the question of will Pakistan can forever give dictation to the Taliban? So I think I'm very doubtful about that. And then there is the larger question of Taliban itself, who would want to reach out and establish its own standing in the world. I'm sure once they've already tasted the diplomatic advantages of having to engage the world, there will be other countries offering them all kinds of incentives. So I think they will seek to pursue their own interests. And I think we must bet on the basic human instinct for autonomy, sovereignty, and for doing what is in their interest, rather than being merely an extension of Pakistan in Kabul. So there, I think it will take time. I mean, it's not that tomorrow they're going to turn to India and say, we love you. No, there is a chill in the relationship. There will be a prolonged chill. But I think India can wait out and see how it goes. After all, the Mujahideen that fought the Soviet occupation in the 80s were very angry with India for seen as siding with the Russian occupation. But within a few years, many of them began to be friends of India. They began to engage India. But if you're a skeptic, you could argue, look, Taliban did not do this in the 6 years they were in power. They did not do it. But probably over a period of time, when Taliban's own problems in terms of how it manages its ideology, how does it reconcile ideology with national interest, how does it reconcile friendship with Pakistan with strategic autonomy, those issues, I think, will begin to filter out. And I think India must be patient. This, simply, oh my God, the world has collapsed because Taliban has come to power. That I don't think that's the way any large state does business in the world.
Right, sir. Thanks so much. We will obviously on the IndianExpress.com, we can read the piece, and there will be a lot of others keeping track of the developments in Afghanistan. Thank you so much, sir.
Thanks.